Have you ever noticed? The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, the one who brags the most, who threatens, who demands to be noticed. They're the easiest to predict and the quickest to fall. But the one you truly fear is the one who says nothing, the one whose silence feels heavier than 1,000 words, the one you can't read, can't provoke, can't control. And that is exactly the kind of force we're about to forge today. A lion doesn't growl before it strikes. It watches, waits, measures its moment in absolute silence, and the strongest man doesn't shout to be feared. Some people rely on noise, threats, volume, and raw emotion to try and dominate a room. But real power, true, unshakable power, it isn't loud. It's quiet, calm, unreadable. And that's precisely what makes it terrifying. Because what you can't predict, you can't control. And what you can't control, you fear. In this world, the most dangerous man isn't the one who talks the most. It's the one who barely speaks at all, yet somehow, without effort, controls the entire room. The man whose silence doesn't say, "I don't care," but whispers, "I see everything, and I don't need to react." That kind of presence isn't born by accident. It's built. And today, you and I are going to build it together. Not with cheap tricks, not with empty words, but by cultivating 6 powerful internal states drawn from the timeless wisdom of ancient Stoic philosophy. 6 ways to shift the entire atmosphere around you, to make your enemies second-guess your every move, to leave them uneasy because they have no idea what you'll do next, or who you really are. And that's exactly why they'll fear you. Because while they expect a reaction, a flinch, an outburst, you give them silence. And in that moment, everything changes. Most people, when insulted, when provoked, when threatened, they fight back. It's instinct. Someone mocks them, they defend. Someone tries to humiliate them, they explain. Someone provokes them, they explode. But that isn't strength. That's being a puppet, a pawn moved by someone else's hand. When your enemy can decide your emotions, they've already claimed your peace. And make no mistake, that's the first battle. And here's the trap. The moment you lash out, the second you defend yourself, you're telling them, "You got to me." And that's exactly what they came for. But now, imagine this instead. You don't flinch. You don't defend. You don't blink. You simply look them in the eye, calm, composed, unreadable. Suddenly, they're the ones left exposed. Because in that stillness, in that refusal to play the game, you become terrifying. Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Because silence is a mirror. It forces your enemies to face themselves. They wanted chaos. You gave them stillness. They wanted a show. You gave them a void. And the void never lies. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And when you react with nothing, with sheer, focused, controlled silence, you're not weak. You're proving you've already conquered the battle inside. I once knew a man like this. Quiet, average-looking. He never raised his voice. In a packed boardroom one day, a colleague tried to humiliate him, called him obsolete, laughed at his ideas, tried to crush him in front of everyone. The man didn't argue, didn't even acknowledge it. He simply turned, locked eyes with the attacker, and asked one question. "Are you finished?" Then calmly went back to his spreadsheet. The room fell dead silent. The attacker shrank. That silence didn't say, "I'm weak." It said, "You don't move me. You don't get to decide who I am. And that broke the enemy far more than any clever comeback ever could. Because here's a truth most people never understand. The man who cannot be rattled cannot be touched. The man who no longer needs to prove anything becomes the most feared presence in any room. So train your stillness. Master your pause. Let the storm rage around you and remain unmoved. Because in a world that's addicted to reaction, your refusal to respond becomes the most terrifying move of all. There's a kind of presence that doesn't require permission. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't announce itself with theatrics or charisma. It simply is. Calm, grounded, unshakable. And that on its own becomes unsettling. Because most people are noise. They fill the air with nervous chatter, forced smiles, desperate attempts to be liked or to win approval. But the man who can stand still, without flinching, without over-explaining, without chasing validation, he changes the entire energy of a room, and he does it without saying a word. In a world where silence unsettles and stillness commands, the man who refuses to be moved becomes the one they watch most closely. You see, most people spend their lives in constant motion, talking too much, moving too fast, trying too hard to be noticed, to be liked, to be approved of. It's as if they need attention like oxygen and validation like water, something they chase desperately, even when they won't admit it. They try to fill every corner of a room with their presence, to dominate the space through sheer volume and noise. But what they fail to realize is this: true power doesn't need to dominate. It simply exists. It takes up space naturally, without apology, because it's earned, not performed. There's something deeply unsettling about a man who doesn't flinch. A man who never feels the urge to explain himself, who doesn't chase approval or offer forced smiles to make others comfortable. He stands there, alert, still, steady, present, yet untouchable. And in that stillness, something fascinating begins to happen. The energy in the room shifts. People instinctively lower their voices when they're near him. They speak more carefully. They glance in his direction before finishing their sentences. Not because he asks for it, not because he demands respect, but because his quiet presence enforces it, without a single word. That is power. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that threatens or demands, but the kind that radiates from within. The kind built slowly through years of discipline, clarity, and restraint. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And that is exactly what a man of unshakable presence does. He doesn't waste his breath on enemies. He doesn't trade insults or chase petty victories. He rises so far above the conflict, so far out of reach, that his enemies no longer know how to get to him, and that's why they fear him. I remember a man like this. His name was Elias. He wasn't particularly tall. He didn't wear expensive suits. He rarely smiled. And yet, the moment he stepped into a room, people noticed, not because he was trying to be seen, but precisely because he wasn't. Elias moved slowly, spoke only when necessary, and held eye contact just long enough to make people uncomfortable in their own skin. Every gesture, every word, and even his silences felt deliberate, like a man who never wasted a single movement. And here's the thing. Even when he said nothing, it felt as though something important had just been spoken. Elias worked in a cutthroat, high-stakes world where egos clashed daily, meetings were loud, packed with people desperate to outtalk one another, eager to prove their intelligence and win the moment. But Elias, he stayed quiet. He waited. Let them wear themselves out, arguing and shouting, feeding off each other's insecurity. And when the room finally reached a boiling point, he would lean forward and ask a single question, usually no more than a sentence. And just like that, the room would fall silent. Every scattered thought, every loud voice would sharpen into focus. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he carried himself. No wasted words, no unnecessary emotion. He was a constant, silent reminder that in a world of chaos, stillness is a threat. And soon, people began to fear his silence. Not because it was passive, but because it was unreadable. Because it meant he was watching, calculating, biding his time, choosing his moment. And the people who fear you the most, they're never the ones who yell. They're the ones who realize they can't predict you. That is the weapon of unshakable presence. It keeps your enemies off balance. It forces manipulators to tread carefully. It makes even the loudest voices lower themselves in your silence. So how do you build it? You stop performing. You stop chasing attention like it's currency. You slow your breath. Straighten your spine. Speak only when there's something worth saying. And most of all, you practice doing nothing. You let your stillness become the loudest force in the room. Because a man deeply rooted in purpose, anchored in clarity, and forged in restraint doesn't need to move fast. He makes the world slow down to meet him. When a man no longer chases attention, when he stands so still that the world must slow down to meet him, something remarkable happens. He no longer needs to assert his power, because he becomes it. And this is where the story shifts. Because the moment you become that kind of presence, people will notice. And not always in the way you'd expect. Some won't admire you. Some won't celebrate your calm. Instead, they'll fear it. Not because they hate you, but because of what you represent to them. You become a quiet reminder of everything they've compromised in themselves. Your progress, your discipline, your refusal to play by the frantic emotional rules that govern their lives. And so they'll attack, not with fists, but with words, not to win, but to provoke, to drag you down from that unshaken place you stand. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Insults are rarely about truth. They're about control. It's an attempt to disrupt your balance, to chip away at your peace, to test if they can bend your emotions to their will. What they're after is your reaction. They want to feel powerful by making you flinch, to see if, beneath that calm exterior, they can stir the storm. And the moment you respond, no matter how sharp, no matter how justified, you've handed them exactly what they came for. It doesn't matter how intelligent your comeback sounds. It doesn't matter how righteous your anger might feel in that instant. If your peace was stolen even for a second, they won. The very fact that you broke silence means they reached you. But when you don't flinch, when you don't explain, when you don't even acknowledge the insult, it becomes louder in their own head than it ever could in yours. Because silence, in the face of attack, is not weakness. It's a verdict, a cold, steady declaration that says, "You're not worth my response." And nothing is more humiliating than being ignored by someone you intended to hurt. I once knew a woman like this. Her name was Clara. She worked in a ruthless corporate environment. a place where gossip, backhanded compliments, and passive aggression were traded like currency. In that world, status wasn't earned by integrity, but by how ruthlessly you could undercut the next person. And Clara, she became a quiet, unmoving wall in the middle of all that noise. There was one co-worker in particular, bitter, petty, consumed by envy, who made it her personal mission to tear Clara down. The attack started small, a sarcastic remark, disguised as a joke, a compliment laced with venom. Whispers, just loud enough to be heard, but Clara never bit the bait, not once. She would offer a calm, gentle smile, take her notes, focus on her work, and leave every room with the same steady, unbroken energy she entered with. No raised voice, no defense, no retaliation, and over time, something strange began to happen. The attacker grew louder, meaner, more desperate, like a person shouting at a stone wall, hoping it might finally crack. But the louder she became, the smaller she appeared, until one day, people stopped laughing, stopped listening, stopped giving her the attention she craved. Because when you keep throwing punches at something that refuses to move, eventually, you're the one who looks ridiculous. Clara never exposed her enemy. She never gathered allies or launched a counterattack. She simply stood so still, so unmoved, that the other woman fell by her own momentum. That's what Stoicism teaches. Let the fool reveal themselves. Let the insult fall flat against the armor of your silence. Let the attacker crumble beneath the weight of their own insecurity. Epictetus wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you instead of defending yourself, say, 'He obviously doesn't know me very well.'" In other words, never give your enemy the satisfaction of explanation. Don't offer them your outrage. Don't hand them your clarity. Give them your silence, because a man who doesn't defend himself is either defeated or so far above the fight, the battle never reached him in the first place. Be the latter. Let your silence say everything. Let your dignity become the thing they can't tear down. And when someone insults you, when they throw their words like stones, smile. Not because it didn't sting, but because it didn't reach where it truly matters. People fear what they can't predict. They may never say it aloud. But the moment you become unreadable, the moment you refuse to give them a pattern to control, you become dangerous. Because in the end, control always begins with information. When people can't predict you, they fear you. And as we've seen, the moment you stop reacting, you gain an unsettling kind of power, the kind no one knows how to handle. Here's why that matters. Your fears, your ambitions, your habits, your weaknesses, these are all leverage in the wrong hands. And the more you speak, the more you explain yourself, the more you casually reveal those details, the more others quietly take note. Not because they care to understand you, but because they're mapping you, studying you, figuring out how to move you, how to shake you, how to control you when it serves them. But when you withhold, when you move without announcement, without explanation, without seeking permission, you become something else entirely. A problem they can't solve, a question they can't answer, a storm they can't predict. And that kind of unpredictability is terrifying. Here's the thing. You don't need to lie. You don't have to deceive anyone. All you need is to leave space between who you truly are and what people think they know about you. The ancient Stoics understood this perfectly. They didn't live loudly. They didn't broadcast their desires or ambitions for the world to dissect. They moved with quiet intention, with purpose, never with publicity. They shared what was necessary, but never everything. Because the moment You reveal everything. You hand over every tool that could one day be used against you. And once you do that, you're no longer in control. Seneca captured this truth beautifully when he wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." Sometimes silence isn't just wisdom, it's your defense. I remember meeting a man once. His name was Caleb, soft-spoken, disciplined, and never one to overshare. When people asked personal questions, he'd smile, offer a light-hearted remark, then skillfully steer the conversation elsewhere. He wasn't cold, he wasn't arrogant, but he understood something most people don't, that you owe the world, nothing of yourself. At first, some called him mysterious, others accused him of arrogance, but over time, something curious happened. Those same people started to respect him. Why? Because no one could figure him out. They didn't know what made him angry, what made him insecure, what his true ambitions were. And because of that, they couldn't use it against him. And when the pressure came, when the inevitable drama erupted, when rumors flew through the workplace like wildfire, Caleb remained untouchable. No one had a grip on his emotional levers. No one held the blueprint to his mind. He moved through chaos like a shadow, leaving people uneasy not because of what he did, but because of what he might do next. And that's the quiet, lethal power of being unreadable. Because the enemy can't break what he can't reach. And he can't reach what he doesn't understand. Want to build that kind of armor? Then stop narrating your every move. Stop announcing your every intention, your every plan, your every thought like it's a headline. Stop giving people access to every chamber of your mind. Let them guess, let them wonder, let them assume, and let them be wrong. Because a man who keeps something for himself isn't hiding weakness. He's preserving power. And the world has no weapon for a man who walks in silence, who holds his truth like a sword, and reveals only what the moment demands. Let them study you. Let them waste their energy trying to decode your stillness. Let them burn themselves out attempting to predict a pattern that doesn't exist anywhere but within your own disciplined will. We live in a world obsessed with talking. Obsessed with announcing, explaining, forecasting. Everyone's rushing to declare their next move, their latest goal, their plans, routines, upgrades, and transformations. People shout about what they intend to do before they've done it, chasing applause for the promise rather than for the outcome, and they mistake attention for progress. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to stop. Your enemies don't need to outwork you if they can outmaneuver you, and nothing makes that easier than a man who constantly reveals his hand. But the man who acts in silence? Who builds in the dark? Who moves without broadcasting? That man is unstoppable. Because by the time the world realizes what he's done, it's already too late. The Stoics understood this long before us. They weren't interested in speeches. They didn't chase attention or post their daily affirmations. They didn't parade their virtues. They lived it, quietly, ruthlessly, with discipline, because they knew a timeless truth. Action without noise is the clearest, purest form of self-respect. Epictetus said it best. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Let others explain. Let them sell the dream. Let them chase applause for the idea of success while you chase the thing itself. We've seen what happens when you stop announcing your every move and let your actions speak for you. In silence, power shifts quietly. And most people won't notice until it's too late. I once knew a woman named Samira. brilliant, focused, driven, but quiet, almost to the point of invisibility. While everyone else at her company bragged endlessly about new projects, side ventures, and future promotions, Samira stayed in her lane. She kept her head down, did the work, and spoke only when necessary. At first, no one paid her much attention. They saw her as soft, passive, even forgettable, until one day her name surfaced in a boardroom meeting, not as a background player, but as the one person in the entire company who had quietly built a system that saved the firm millions. Suddenly, every head turned, every eye landed on her. But by then, she was already gone, promoted, transferred, elevated to a position none of them saw coming because, while they wasted their breath chasing attention, Samira had been too busy building something real. That's what silent action does. It shifts power without warning. It creates outcomes so undeniable they don't need to be explained. And it leaves those who doubted you stunned. Not because they didn't see you coming, but because they never thought to take you seriously until it was far too late. And if you want to build that kind of quiet force in your life, start here. Shut the door. Do the work. Let your effort echo in the silence. Don't warn people. Don't forecast your greatness. Don't overpromise. Disappear into your action, and then reappear with undeniable results. Because when you act without warning, you don't just avoid resistance. You create something far more unsettling. Fear. Not fear of what you said you'd do, but fear of what you might do next. That silence, that tension, that mystery. It becomes louder than any word you could have spoken. And there's something deeply uncomfortable about a person who doesn't need approval. In a world built on likes, applause, and public validation, most people learn to edit themselves just enough to stay likable. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny, nod when they disagree, hide their sharp edges, all to avoid friction and stay safely within the crowd. And that's exactly why the one person who refuses to do it, the one who walks in exactly as they are, no mask, no performance, becomes a threat. Not because they're cruel, not because they're confrontational, but because their unapologetic presence silently exposes the compromises everyone else has made to belong. Authenticity is uncomfortable, especially to the inauthentic. When you stop trying to fit in, you do more than free yourself. You quietly force others to confront the parts of themselves they abandoned long ago. You remind them, without a word, what it looks like to live without asking permission. I once knew a man like that too. His name was Jace. He wasn't loud, he wasn't edgy, but he had a way of making people uneasy, and he didn't even have to try. He spoke clearly, but never adjusted his tone to win people over. He didn't follow trends. He wore what he liked, said exactly what he meant, and when others gossiped or complained, he stayed quiet. Not because he was afraid, but because his principles didn't allow him to engage in nonsense. Some people avoided him. They whispered behind his back, saying things like, "He thinks he's better than everyone," or "He's too intense." But deep down, what they felt wasn't hostility from Jace. It was pressure from within themselves. A quiet, gnawing awareness of their own inability to live as boldly and honestly as he did, because Jace wasn't rebelling. He wasn't making a statement. He was simply himself, unapologetically, consistently. And in a world obsessed with performance, that was more radical than any rebellion. That's the paradox of authenticity. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply stands there, calm, unmoved, and forces others to examine the mask they've been wearing. The Stoics knew this well. They believed in living according to your nature, not according to the world's expectations, not chasing the crowd's mood, just virtue, integrity, alignment, and if that made you the odd one out, so be it. In fact, it made your presence stronger. Marcus Aurelius said it best. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one, as Marcus Aurelius reminded us. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to match the energy of the room. And you certainly don't need to be understood by those who have no business reading your story. You just need to be real. And in a world built on performance, where everyone's wearing a mask and rehearsing their lines, being real isn't just rare. It's terrifying. So, if you want to become that kind of force, the kind of presence people feel before you speak, start here. Stop apologizing for who you are. Stop softening your edges to stay digestible. Stop watering yourself down. To avoid making others uncomfortable. Don't hide your pace. Don't dilute your clarity. Speak less, but when you do, mean every word. Say no when it's a no. Walk away when it's over. Hold your standards firm, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you refuse to betray yourself. Because when you finally become the version of yourself that doesn't flinch, doesn't adjust for attention, and doesn't perform for applause, you don't just move through life in peace. You move with pressure. The silent kind. The kind that makes weaker men fix their posture before you even glance in their direction. You didn't have to raise your voice. You didn't have to issue threats. You didn't beg for their respect. And yet, they hesitated. They second-guessed themselves. They feared what you might do next because you gave them nothing to read and everything to feel. And that's the point. You didn't fight your enemies. You didn't chase them down. You simply became the kind of man who makes enemies uncomfortable just by existing. No noise, no drama, just silence, forged in relentless self-mastery. Because in every room, the most feared man is never the one shouting. It's the one who doesn't need to. So don't shout. Don't explain. Don't scramble to be seen. Let your stillness speak. Let your boundaries echo in the air long after you've left the room. Let your silence do the kind of damage no one saw coming. And by the time they finally realize who you really are, you'll already be gone, quiet, focused, untouchable. And if somewhere in this message something shifted in you, if a part of you felt it like a quiet echo reminding you of who you were meant to be, drop a comment below. Tell me how this spoke to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Not because we asked, but because you've made a decision to stop being average, to stop chasing noise, to start building quiet, unshakable power. Welcome to the world of still power. Welcome to Stoic Scrolls. If you found value in this, give it a like. It tells us we're speaking to the right people. Until next time, stay silent, stay dangerous.